Let's break down the most important players for the Cincinnati Bengals future.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapine. Today we begin a six-part series, the longest series I think we've ever done on this podcast on one topic, ranking and analyzing the most important players to the future of the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll introduce you to that project today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, covering your team every day. We're on YouTube. We're everywhere you get your podcasts. And shout out to all of you out there who are everydayers and who make us their first listen. Appreciate all of you who have those habits. And if you're new, well, interesting time to start listening to Cincinnati Bengals content, but we will have you covered throughout the offseason. And with training camp coming, before you know it, get your summer vacations in, then it'll be training camp time. We'll have you covered for training camp and into the regular season as well. Today, James, we kick off the big project that I've been pretty excited for and have been putting together with a group of some voting experts, a panel of voters, including yourself, including some frequent guests on this show. Joe Goodberry is one of the voters. Mike Santagadis Sands is one of the voters. John Sheeran, one of the voters. You'll hear from them next week. We also gathered a bunch of information from public voters on Twitter, people who replied to a tweet. We're tabulating those results, and we'll have the public results as well. And so through all of this ranking and data gathering and data entry, we've produced what will be a nice list with some good debate of who the most important Bengals are for the future of the team, for the future of the franchise. And obviously, you could talk about future draft picks and stuff like that if you really get into the future. We didn't do that. We're only considering players on the team now. But the most interesting thing will be where the differences lie. And you'll see those as we get through each of these episodes and talk about the consensus rankings and see where those big gaps in standard deviation are that indicate a lot of divergence in rankings. And we'll talk about some different methodologies. I think that'll be pretty cool.
No doubt. I think that's the most interesting element of this is we know who's important, but who's important now, who's important 6 months from now, who's important a year from now. And how do you weigh that versus 2025 or 2026, the future of this title window that the Bengals are in? And that's what's interesting is kind of breaking down these guys in a different way. And I think you're going to feel differently about guys than I am. We're going to get to your list here in just a second. On our next show, we'll get to my list and top guys, and then we'll have the consensus rankings, and then we'll get some guests and have them chime in as well. So this is a fun way, I think, to break down the top of the Bengals roster, and not just the top of the roster, but the most important building blocks that are on this roster moving forward. So, Jake, I say we dive into your list. What do you think?
Yeah, I'll pull it up here. We'll have a visual aid here if you're watching on YouTube, and if you're not watching on YouTube, of course, we will make sure that we're talking through everything. And what I did, James, for my methodology here is I went through the next 4 years, and you could have gone out further than that because Joe Burrow's under contract longer than that. And I assigned a score out of 10 to each player in each of those years. And part of my methodology also considers the draft capital spent. It considers positional value. It considers whether or not I think the Bengals will retain a player. So for Trey Hendrickson, for example, I've got scores for him for 2024 and 2025, and I don't think there's a great chance that he's on the team in 2026. And so because of that, he still gets a number for 2026 for me, but it's a small number because it accounts for the probability that I think he's on the team at that point. Similarly, T. Higgins gets a big number for year one. I think he's really important to the team in 2024. but generously giving him half of that credit for 2025, saying there's even a 50% chance, and that would be like a year two tag thought is why he has a score for year two. So I've got their year one importance, so 2024 importance, their importance over the next 2 years, their importance over 3 years, and then a weighted rank that considers how I've scored them over a 4-year period. And obviously at the top, Joe Burrow. I think there will be a lot of consensus there.
What? No, what? No, I'm just kidding.
It was interesting because I actually tweeted on Thursday night, the standard deviation, which just shows where we had consensus and where we had big divergence on our rankings in our 5-person panel, not including the public rankings at that point because we didn't have them yet. But there was a lot of consensus, and we'll talk about that a little bit later this week on a few players. Joe Burrow, obviously one of them, not much to say there. The team runs through the quarterback, and everyone's going to have him at number one. And number two is Jamar Chase. The other thing that makes the offense go largely is Jamar Chase. He will continue to be the engine for this team on offense for the foreseeable future. He's under team control for at least 3 years between the 5th-year option and a potential franchise tag. But the way that I've done it, I'm expecting him to get extended. I'm not expecting the Bengals to have to go through this franchise tag stuff with him. So he gets a full second most important player on the team score through 4 years. And I imagine there's a reaction to those two at the top.
Well, yeah, they're no-brainers. And spoiler, when my list comes around, I have a feeling that it is going to be Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase at the top, and it should be. And I don't think there's many. This is really subjective, right? How we look at it, philosophy, all those things, and that's why we're doing 6 parts. Is there's a lot to this, but I think you're straight up wrong if you don't have Joe and then Jamar. And this is the only time, not you, just in general, anyone that doesn't have Joe and then Jamar, I just think you're wrong. And then we can start with number 3. So that's probably the only time I'll say that. There's not many right and wrong, black and white. There is here. It's Joe, Jamar, and then we'll start with number 3 is where the debates can begin.
Yeah, I think when I was looking through the public voting, I saw one maybe that had Jamar Chase third.
One wrong. Okay. So there's one that's...
We're not going to call out the individual, but I was surprised, to say the least, to see the Jamar Chase behind someone. And I don't even remember who exactly it was. I couldn't tell you right now. But it gets interesting at number 3. And one thing that we'll just show real quick, when I order this by their importance for 1 year, it looks very different, right? And you can see where, T. Higgins, he's one of the most important players this year for this team. But as soon as you consider the years where he's not on the team in the future, his rank for future importance goes down. So when you're looking to the right here at the 3-year rank and the 4-year rank, I've got T. Higgins' overall importance for the future at 16, which doesn't make my top 15. But when you look at it for just this year, I have him tied with Orlando Brown. Probably should be ahead of Orlando Brown for this year, actually, now that I look at it. That's not a tie that I noticed before. But I have a bunch of guys that are essentially tied for importance for 1 year. And that's like Cam Taylor-Britt, Geno Stone, Sheldon Rankins, Mike Hilton, BJ Hill. I see all those guys roughly in the same bucket. I could do decimal points to try to break the ties somewhere, but like roughly equivalent in 1 year value. But then when you look into the future, and you see the lower value when you consider the future importance, considering the 4-year window, it highlights where the Bengals will have to backfill talent or find free agents or find extensions for some of these guys. And that's why I like to do the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year and weighted rank columns. But we should continue with the discussion here. We'll put it back in order of the future importance weighted rank and get back into the conversation of the most important Bengals for the future in my top 15 coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the place you need to go to right now and get in on all of the sports betting action. I love sports. I love them so much that, I don't want them to stop, and training camp is right around the corner, but playoffs are winding down. Obviously, the NBA finals are in the books and there's fewer games, but when you do decide that you want to make those wagers, whether it's on the WNBA, whether it's Major League Baseball, whether it's NFL futures with Joe Burrow and company, well, FanDuel is going to put you in position to do just that. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long with FanDuel. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon, FanDuel.com/lockedon, FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
All right, James, let's keep going on the most important Bengals for the future. This is my top 15. I went obviously beyond 15 here and went a little overkill. We're going to focus on the top 15 or so. And coming in at number 3 for me ends up being Myles Murphy, which I was a little bit surprised by, because I don't anticipate Murphy having a massive role this year, but I am anticipating him having a much bigger role this year than he had last year. And then I'm anticipating him taking over roughly starter level snaps. And let me explain this further for people who maybe aren't necessarily bullish on Myles Murphy. This importance for the future ranking isn't all talking about, I think he's going to be the third best player on the team in 3 years. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm saying he was a first round pick at a premium position. So whether he's good or not is a very important factor for the success of the future of the Cincinnati Bengals. If he's good and he breaks out immediately this year and becomes that Rashawn Gary type player that we've talked about, where, you're talking about a 60 pressure, 10 sack per year kind of player, well, then that's an awesome hit for the Bengals, right? If he becomes 95% of Trey Hendrickson, 90% of Trey Hendrickson as a pass rusher, that's awesome. That's important. If he doesn't, if he's a bust, if he turns out to be a, Cam Sample level player, not to take away from Cam Sample, but Cam Sample wasn't a first round pick. He wasn't a first round pick. There was never the expectation that Cam Sample was going to come in and be a
catching strays. Starter. Sorry, Cam. I wouldn't have done that.
That's not the point. Like, Cam Sample's a really good player. I think he's a solid player, but he's not the pass rushing player that Trey Hendrickson is. You need more than that from your first round pick. And that's why over time, the first round pick, the higher draft capital, those guys are important. You're going to see it with Dax Hill for my ranking as well when we talk about him. But when I think about importance for the future and Myles Murphy coming in at 3, it's because if they miss that pick, it's also very important. So when I think about importance for the future for some of these recent draft picks, and you're going to see it for Marius Mims as well, if these are misses or if they're hits, that player and the outcome for that player is very important to the future of the Bengals, because if it's a miss, they have to spend resources to figure that out, or they just are going to be bad at that position if they continue to run that guy out there and he's not very good. So that's part of why Myles Murphy, regardless of what you think about his future, is so high here.
Well, it's simple when you look at, could he be your next Trey Hendrickson? Because if so, then it's real easy to see how he would be one of your top players and a top 5 player for this franchise moving forward, or one of the most important. And so is that his ceiling? We can debate that all day. That's not the point of this. The point is the most important Bengals for the future. Well, yeah, he's a big part of it. And they took him with the idea that he was going to take some time to develop. And so, yeah, does he turn into that? I think it's interesting that you have him there, and I get it. And that's what's fun about this exercise is I'm sure when people heard Myles Murphy, they're like, what? 3rd? No way. But you just explained why. And if he becomes Miles Hendrickson, which it's not out of the question, or insert whatever. You've mentioned Rashawn Gary a ton, so let's just say Myles Gary. All right. Well, Myles Gary, get that? Oh, man. It's ever so close to Myles Garrett. But, yeah, if he gets to that level, then you feel pretty darn good about what you're saying right now. And that's what's fun, is forecasting not just 2024 importance, but future past that and how you weigh it. So I do get it and understand it. And so with that theme, you mentioned Dax Hill. Now I'm curious where my guy Dax is, where these other top picks are, but you just look at it, your first 3 picks were the Bengals first rounder in 2020, 2021, and 2023. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I'm consistent, right? And these are players that you're expecting to be part of the Bengals' future for at least 3 years. And the reason that Murphy's score in 2027, if you're watching on YouTube, is a little bit lower is because I'm putting in a small chance that the Bengals don't pick up the 5th-year option. I think they probably will for Miles Murphy, and that's
Wow,
reflected
that's
in the number
early.
there.
That's early either way to say. But yeah,
Well,
I get what you're saying.
yeah, I mean, it's a small adjustment, very small adjustment to year 4. And
Sure.
that's part of the problem with this project. Not problem, but difficulty is trying to forecast into the future in the NFL is impossible. Trying to forecast 2 years is impossible. Trying to forecast 1 year is impossible. We're generally wrong as a general NFL public about what's going to happen this season in the NFL. So trying to project 4 years, pretty tough. But we did our best here. Coming in at number 4, Orlando Brown, the first non-draft pick for the Cincinnati Bengals, edging out Amarius Mims. And the reason that he edges out Amarius Mims in this ranking system is that I weighed the first 2 years heavier than the last 2 years. So 2024 and 2025 are weighed more in my formula than 26 and 27. 26 and 27 still count, but because things are less predictable that far into the future, they are discounted in my formula. So because Orlando Brown is expected to be a starter this year, and Amarius Mims, I'm kind of penciling in to start, I don't know, maybe 30 to 40% of the games because I expect Trent Brown at some point to miss time. That's just what probability tells us, and maybe he doesn't. But because of that, because Orlando Brown is expected to be a full-time starter this year and expected, honestly, to be the best offensive lineman on this team this year, that's why he gets the nudge for 2024, goes down a little bit in 25 and 26 because that's when I expect Amarius Mims to step in and potentially supplant Orlando Brown as the best lineman on the team sometime in that window. But even without a 4th year at all for Orlando Brown, he comes in at number 4 for me just because he's one of the more important players in the first 2 years, and he does have a 3rd year. And so Orlando Brown, the left tackle of the next 3 years, coming in at number 4 for me.
Yeah, the interesting part here is if Mims is a hit, just because of control and all of those things, we may know by week 8, oh, he's a hit.
Mm-hmm.
And if that happens, then this could flip quickly, right? Because of that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Orlando Brown Jr. is super important. Obviously, he brought stability to that left tackle spot that they really hadn't had. We're not talking about left tackle much. Why? Because they have Orlando Brown Jr. So I'm not going to debate you there. I'm not going to debate you on Mims either, because again, it's a ceiling play where he may not hit his ceiling for a few years, right? He's young, but could he be a competent starting tackle as a rookie if you need him to be, and then slowly build from there and be an anchor on this offensive line for the next decade? Well, he could. And certainly during his rookie contract, and you did these 4 years, I get why he's 5th and really, really high. And by the way, high traits, high skill set makes a ton of sense to me.
Yeah, and another part of the reason he's up there is the same that we discussed for Miles Murphy. It's the 1st-round pick, the highest 1st-round pick the Bengals have made since Jamar Chase after they spent a few years picking at the back of the 1st round, and that elevates his importance. If he misses and they miss on that pick, that hurts more than missing on a later round pick. They're expecting him to be a long-term starter. That elevates his importance. And as you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, the raw score for Mims actually is higher than the raw score for Orlando Brown. So if I didn't do the weighted thing, it would actually be Amarius Mims 4th. And actually, Cam Taylor-Britt would have been 5th. He's the next guy. Spoilers. He's coming in at 6th for me. But when I do the weighted formula that kind of bakes in the unpredictability of the future of the NFL, the farther into the future we go, that brings Orlando Brown to 4, Amarius Mims to 5. And that's because he should be the best offensive lineman on the team pretty soon. Highest draft capital, highest skill set, highest ceiling out of any offensive lineman on the team right now. And that's why he is where he is for me. James, we have a lot of ground to cover here to finish
10
up
guys. 10 guys, Jake.
It'll
cover.
have to speed up. Coming up next.
All right, you already spoiled it. You already said who was number 6. So why is Cam Taylor-Britt number 6?
He's the corner 1 on the team right now by default, and so that gets you some points in terms of positional value there. And I think they will extend Cam Taylor-Britt. I'm just not 100% sure. If I was 100% sure they would extend Cam Taylor-Britt, he might actually be a little bit higher here. But because he's not a true CV1 in my eyes, he was a second round pick. He's not a first round pick. That goes into it. The positional value bumps him up. The de facto best corner on the team bumps him up. But if he was, uh, the Patrick Surtain caliber of player, he would be higher. I just don't see him there, at least yet. I think he has a chance to take that leap. Bengals coaches obviously remain very bullish on him. Has to get through a full season healthy as well. But as a second round pick and as the top corner on the team, there's a lot of importance there. And the reason that he's not higher or lower is because I think they will extend him. I'm just giving it like an 80% chance or so. And because of that, he comes in at number 6 for me.
Yeah, I think Cam has a chance to solidify that status this year. This is a big year for Cam. Where can he take another step? We talk a lot about Dax Hill and DJ Turner in that battle there. Well, if he takes another step forward, then you won't say by default when it comes to CB1.
Yeah,
and CBT or CTB, excuse me, could certainly do that. So we'll see if he can. But no, I'm not shocked to see him in your top 10. I am shocked. I'm a little surprised, I got to be honest, about the next guy being where he is. And I know the logic. You explained it earlier. But obviously he's a problem this year in a good way for the Bengals.
Yeah, Trey Hendrickson is 7th for my weighted system considering the next 4 years. But if you look at year 1, 2024 or 2024 and 2025, he's number 3 because I think he is probably the third best player and third most impactful player on the team right now. And so when you look at just 1 year or you look at just 2 years, he would be right up there at the top. But because for me, there's a lot of uncertainty about his presence on the team beyond that point, that's where he drops to number 7. Still in the top 10, but because I don't anticipate him being on the team at all in 26 and 27, when I think about future, that's where he falls down the rankings for me a little bit. But that's why I included the 4 columns here, so you could see very clearly, yeah, this guy's really important in the short term, and they're going to need to replace him in the long term. But because he's not on the team in the long term, that's where he falls down the rankings a little bit.
Yep. No, it's interesting to see the logic, and I think you explaining it helps people, especially when they see it on YouTube. But that's just 7. We have 8 to go. So who rounds out the next few? And we can break them down, of course, but round out the top 10. Let people know that, and then we can go guy by guy after that.
Yeah, well, a couple of these go together. So Logan Wilson, just by virtue of being under contract and expecting him to be a starter for the next 4 years, comes in at 8 for me. And like I said, a lot of that is just because he's going to be on the team. DJ Turner and Dax Hill at 9 and 10 round out the top 10. And part of that is because I don't know which of those guys is going to be the CB2, or which of those guys has a chance to be the CB2 and step up to be a CB 1.5. Like Cam Taylor-Britt has a chance to step up and be a CB1. And so I give Dax a little bit of a bump in 25 because of the first round pick status. And if they miss on that pick, the Bengals will feel that impact of missing on that pick. But I'm not sure he's going to be on the 5th year option for the Bengals in 2026. And so that gives DJ Turner a bit of an edge because we know for sure he's on the team in 2026. But one of those guys at least needs to shake out and be a solid player for this team. And if neither does, the Bengals will really feel that in their secondary being just a sore spot. And so that's the top 10 with DJ Turner and Dax Hill really going hand in hand. And if you ask us in a year from now or 2 years from now, that's the one where you could see a significant change because you don't know which of those guys is going to shake out, if any.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's it's almost boom or bust for those guys. It feels like where like you could hit a home run and hopefully you hit at least a double with both, maybe a home run with one, maybe you hit 2 home runs. That would be awesome, wouldn't it? But it's a big year for both of them. And I get it. I don't think anyone was as high on Dax as I was when they picked him. It's been a rough couple of years. So hopefully he can find his footing at corner. DJ, I think he's a good corner now. And he's just got to shore up some things to show that he's a starting cornerback for a contending team that's expecting to be really, really good on defense again.
Yeah, he has some things to work on. Fair to say that. He's a second-year player. This is where you would expect him to make the biggest jump. We talk about that and hear that from coaches all the time. So we'll see what happens with that battle in camp. That'll be fun. The next 3 guys for me, James, are all kind of in the same boat. They're young guys that don't have a clear role this year, but need to be starting level players in the future based on who is behind them, the lack of reinforcements, the expectation for their career paths. So that is Chris Jenkins at 11, Jordan Battle at 12, and Jermaine Burton at 13. And Burton is the one here, as I talk about it, that my gut says he should be higher, but it's less clear to me that he is penciled in as a wide receiver 2 of the future. They do need a wide receiver 2 of the future, but as a 3rd round pick, a late 3rd round pick at that, it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Bengals drafted another receiver highly in the next couple of years and went that route to backfill for wide receiver 2. They've got Andre Yosevich, they've got Charlie Jones, they've got Jermaine Burton on the team. Jermaine Burton had the most draft capital invested, and so there's the bigger importance there for me with Burton than those other guys. And if he does step up and become wide receiver 2, obviously this number goes up. And I'm kind of projecting that upward trajectory for Burton over time. But there's just a lot of uncertainty right now with him as a rookie 3rd round pick that I wasn't very comfortable putting him much higher in any of my year-by-year scores, and that's what informs my overall score. For Chris Jenkins, there's a very clear path to being a starter on this team. 2nd round pick, so a higher investment there. And there's nobody else under contract next year besides Sheldon Rankins. And so the path for him being a starter is immediately next year. I expect him to be a role player this year. I expect him to be a rotational player this year. And maybe he should be a little bit higher for 2024. Now that I look at it, he's tied with Jordan Battle and Jermaine Burton for 2024. I think there's a bigger role for Chris Jenkins. And that could be positional battle or positional value as well. I do value safety and wide receiver a little bit higher than I value the role that I expect Chris Jenkins to play. And Jordan Battle, similar logic to Chris Jenkins, clear path to being a starter at some point in his Bengals tenure. And actually probably shouldn't have anything there for him for 2027, giving him the benefit of the doubt of being on the team in that year. But it's the same story of role player this year, starter sometime in the next couple of years. And that's this group of 3 guys at 11, 12, and 13.
Yeah, I think it's a philosophical thing where it's really going to be interesting to see people's reactions. That's as you're discussing it, everyone views it differently. And that's what's fun. I'm looking at my list and I'm writing for those wondering. I'm writing like little things like, well, this is how I view it. And my list is set, by the way, for those wondering. But no, it's interesting to see who cracked the top 15 because there are guys that are in your top 15 that aren't sniffing my top 15 and vice versa. So it's interesting.
Yeah, there's some different methodologies, and we'll talk about the consensus, and we'll talk with the other voters and get their reactions to where they're higher and lower. I've got a whole sheet. This whole spreadsheet has all the places where consensus. We'll talk about all those. But to round out my list, James, here, I've got the 2 guys that signed 2-year deals here at tied for 14th, but at 14 and 15. I didn't break the tie, but this would be my top 15, would be Geno Stone and Sheldon Rankins to round things out. Both players expected to be starters, but both expected to be significant contributors to this team, but only for 2 years. And Geno Stone, there's a chance that he's back for a 3rd or 4th year. There's a chance that he comes back for another extension if they really like the fit because he's a little bit younger, but Sheldon Rankins already in his 30s. I would be shocked to see the Bengals bring him back after this deal. So only 2 years projected for either of these guys. They round out the list at 15. And so who missed the list? is also interesting. T. Higgins right outside the top 15 for me. So important in the short term. So much doubt that he will be part of the team in the long term. Chase Brown right outside of the top 15 for me as well because of the positional value of running back. But if he takes a big step, he would force his way up this list. It's just the positional value of running back. Evan McPherson just outside of the top 15 as well, positional value of kicker. And then some guys down at the bottom that I just want to shout out real quick for having a lot of importance in the short term, but I don't see them being around for the team in the future, are Mike Hilton and BJ Hill, who both of those guys I would have in the top 10 for this year, but they're in the last year of their deal. So the future rankings really knocking those guys down.
Yeah, I think it's fun. This is fun. My mind is spinning here, reacting to your rankings in my head, thinking about how people are going to react. And I'm looking at my list here and just seeing the differences. So there's part one. Jake's top 15 most important, who made it, who didn't, for the future of the Cincinnati Bengals. For honestly, this window, it's obviously a Super Bowl window, but we hope or expect or think that there's a real chance that they're going to win the first Super Bowl championship in this window. And so identifying these players is really important, because saying Amarius Mims is fifth means that he's going to probably be blocking in the Super Bowl when the game is on the line, or that Cam Taylor-Britt is going to be guarding the top wide receiver on the opposite team when the game is on the line in these high stakes playoff games that we've seen over the past couple of years outside of last season. So we'll see if that happens. But yeah, I like this already, and I'm excited to see all the feedback and reaction from our listeners and viewers.
Yeah, the fun part will be the differences and where the methodologies are a little bit different and how people have approached this. I'm really excited for that part. And hopefully my methodology makes sense for people as I tried to explain each one as we went through it and why I kind of went about it the way that I went about it. It really highlights who the pieces, who the cornerstone pieces for the future should be, right? And where you would feel it if they miss, where you would feel it if they hit. And that was my approach to looking at this and thinking about where these guys should be when you talk about importance for the future. On our next episode, we'll break down Jane's top 15. You'll start to see some of the differences. We'll talk about some of the biggest disagreements between Jane's list and my list. We'll keep this going. We got 5 more parts in this series, including consensus, and each of our panel will join us for episodes as well. That'll be coming your way in the future here on Locked On Bengals. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.